Hey and hello to friends and listeners of Radio Game. Hope you're doing great because we're heading straight into the Wild West to tell you the story and juicy background of Red Dead Redemption 2. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a game from Rockstar Games that came out in 2018, and its story takes place in 1899 in a fictional version of America. The game has a strong focused narrative, a huge detailed open world, amazing character work, and most importantly, it reads like a visual novel about the end of an era, the end of the Wild West, and how people face laws, modernity choices, and the consequences of the past mistakes. The production, design, and storytelling put you into roleplay for hours. From its realistic graphics to its terrifying attention to detail, it got a tons of praise and some criticism. Some critics gave it a 97 out of 100 and said it's a masterpiece. We mostly followed the game from Arthur Morgan's point of view. Arthur is a core member and the right-hand man to the gang's leader, Dutch van der Linde, a charismatic and idealistic guy who thinks he's building a free family outside the law and promises his crew a better life. The gang is like a found family. Some are fighters, some are thieves, some handle logistics and camp life, but all of them have a fierce, basic loyalty to Dutch's idea of freedom. Everything kicks off with a big heist in a town called Blackwater that goes wrong, which puts the law and private agencies like the Pinkertons on the trail, and from there we see the gang slowly start to fall apart under outside pressure and internal conflict. After that failed Blackwater robbery, the gang has to run. Winter's coming, and a lot of their money and plans are half broken. The members split up and head toward different parts of the south and west to regroup. Arthur, who's always loyal to Dutch, tries to calm people down and keep the group alive. On the journey, we meet characters like John Marston, who likely becomes the protagonist in the next game, Bill Williamson, Javier Escuela, Charles Smith, Sadie Adler, and Susan Grimshaw, and Micah Bell. Each of them has their own backstory, which makes the game not just about shootouts and horses, but a whole catalog of human fates. As the story goes on, the outside pressure from the government, law enforcement, and private agencies like Pinkertons, and the inside pressure, doubts and disagreements about Dutch's choices both build up. Dutch is a man with big ideals, freedom, autonomy, his own version of justice, but over time, as failures mount and money and resources run low, Dutch's behavior changes. His decisions get reckless and dangerous, and it sometimes feels like a very cause he was talking about in turning into something else. Arthur, who has always valued loyalty, slowly sees that his loyalty might be what destroys him and the people he cares about. Those doubts and questions form a big part of Arthur's arc, a key piece that turns the story from a straightforward plot into a moral tragedy is the arrival of a new, chaotic member named Micah Bell. Micah is hot-headed, selfish, and has his own motives. His words and actions increase the division inside the gang. At first, Micah seems like an ally, but over time it becomes clear he plays a destructive role in the gang's collapse. Many of the bad decisions, or at least the paths that lead to bad outcomes, are influenced by him. The growing suspicion about Micah and Dutch's reactions to dissent push the story toward its final confrontation. On the other hand, one of the central threads in Arthur's illness, tuberculosis. When Arthur finds out he's sick and time is limited, he starts re-examining his choices, looking back at his life with different eyes and trying to find what he can. Arthur's illness is a classic literary motif. Imminent death forces the character to face truths and make moral choices. That element deepens the game's themes of repentance, confronting the past and searching for meaning. After fleeing Blackwater, the gang moves through a string of temporary hideouts, snowy mountains, riverside camps, and eventually places near to larger towns. Each stop brings missions, robberies, or moments that either bring the crew together or tear them apart. At one point, the gang enters St. Denis, a busy industrial city that represents modern change, and even there, another big robbery attempt escalates everything and makes the Pinkertons and the law haunt them even harder. St. Denis stands for the new world pushing against Dutch's old ideals, and that cultural and economical clash is always present in the story. Meanwhile, the relationships between members become clear. Sadie Adler starts as an abused woman and turns into a fierce, hardened fighter. John Marston is a complex man trying to leave his criminal past behind and build something normal. Charles Smith is a dignified, capable warrior who often speaks with integrity. And Susan Grimshaw keeps the camp in order, gruff but effective. These characters move the story beyond a single point of view and create a human puzzle where each piece has meaning. As the game progresses, Dutch clings to his big ideas even more. His passion for freedom turns into paranoia and violent decision making. Some gang members stay fiercely loyal, while others want to split off or leave entirely. Arthur tries to keep a balance between loyalty and the reality he sees. But with every failure and reckless choice Dutch makes, the rift widens. One major twist happens when Arthur suspects Mika may be in contact with the Pinkertons or otherwise acting against the gang's interests. Suspicion and mistrust rise, and Arthur must choose between loyalty to Dutch and the truth he's starting to see. This is where Arthur becomes a fuller, more complex person, or just a killer, or someone who believed in loyalty and family and now wonders whether the family was ever truly one or just an excuse for violence and control. When the chase intensifies and members scatter, the game moves toward its tragic ending. Arthur, seeking redemption and trying to help those left behind, face hard moral choices. Depending on the player's actions, there are different endings, but the emotional core is the same. Arthur, weakened by illness and surrounded by betrayals, starts coming to terms with truth he once refused to see. Fans and critics call this Arthur's redemption arc. After those events, the game hands over control to John Marston in an epilogue, and that's how Red Dead Redemption 2 connects to the 2010 game Red Dead Redemption. In the epilogue, we see how John attempts to build a new life and family, trying to forget the past, but the past never fully leaves him. This link between the two games is a big reason the series hits so hard for players. The writing and direction, including Arthur's deep characterization, have been widely praised. Don Hauser, one of the game's lead writers, has said Arthur is one of the best characters he's ever helped create. That speaks to the psychological detail and the small, everyday things that shape Arthur. The soundtrack and sound design also play an emotional storytelling role, not just heightening drama, but creating empathy for characters and how a strong sense of time and place. Importantly, the game isn't just about shooting and theft, it's about economic, social, and moral consequences of change. The arrival of industry, banks, and structured police forces that transform the old world. Throughout the game, Arthur gets a chance to change his behavior, to help people, treat others right, and make more human choices. Actions that affect his honor rating and can change how the story ends. Some endings give a different sense of redemption or regret, so the game isn't strictly linear. Arthur Morgan is Dutch's adopted son or spiritual child, someone who joined the gang as a young man and whose core ethic is loyalty. Over the course of the story, Arthur becomes someone who, instead of blind loyalty, seeks truth. Dutch, meanwhile, is a charismatic leader who increasingly loses his grip on reason and acts more from fear and paranoia. Mika Bell plays the role of corrosive influence who helps tear the group apart. And John Marston is the man whose path we see that ultimately leads into the earlier game. Each character has many layers that the game slowly reveals, so you can both love and hate them. If I had to boil the game down to one simple, everyday message, it had been this. Red Dead Redemption 2 tells you that there are times when people think they can control the world with force, deception, and violence. But in the end, history, time, economic and social forces have their way. People must face the consequences of their actions. Some try to run from the past, some like Arthur try to make amends, and some like Dutch get stuck between ideals and reality. That's why critics say this game is more than entertainment. It's a modern visual tragedy that asks serious moral questions. The writers drew a historical and literary sources to build the world. Dutch's speeches and some dialogue echo late 19th century anarchist and anti-government ideas, and many secondary characters are symbolic. Each represents a human reaction to modernity and the end of an old way of life. That's one reason the game matters to literary and cultural analysts as much as to gamers. Also, the depiction of Arthur's sufferings and how it affects his choices has prompted deep conversations about death, meaning, and ethics in game spaces. Thanks again for sticking with me to end. In short, Red Dead Redemption was a bundle of love, betrayal, and horseback riding. If you liked it, tell me in the comments which part you enjoyed most. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Wishing you lots of awesome video game time. Take care and goodbye.
I've changed for the better this time. I thought I would never be fine. I strive just to say I'm alright. And for the first time in a long time